Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. Apologies in advance, my throat is a little bit messed up, so I might not be talking as loud or as excitedly as usual. But anyway, today we're going to be doing a top 10 where we discuss the best cards for Commander from the Brothers War set. We will be doing a separate video in the next few days where we discuss the best cards for Commander from the Commander decks of the Brothers War. Now that being said, when I make these lists, I try to include cards that are generally useful, so nothing too niche. It's mostly stuff that is going to slot into a wide variety of decks, so if you don't see some cards that you think might be better, please let me know in the comment section below and I'd be happy to discuss that. And without further ado, we're going to go into our honorable mentions. We have 3 this time. The first one is Brotherhood's End. Brotherhood's End is the only red card in this list, so red didn't even make the top 10. As you will see, 2 or 3 colors dominate the list. But anyway, Brotherhood's End is a very good card if your meta consists of a lot of artifact decks and or small tokens decks, because it's going to wipe the board of either of those things for only 3 mana, and it's very flexible. It gives you a lot of utility. Even if your meta is not only based around that, if you can find ways to break the symmetry with this, it can be really good. So if you're playing against people who run a lot of mana rocks and you yourself do not, then this can be a fantastic play on turn 3. Next up in our honorable mention is Tocassia's Welcome. Now this is a very good one. It's very similar to Welcoming Vampire, but it's going to trigger on mana value, which is very nice. It's still going to only do it once per turn, but it's going to be very good in token decks and in lots of different strategies as an extra way for white to draw cards. And finally, we have Gix's Command in the honorable mentions. This card is a very, very flexible one. It's going to be able to do all sorts of different things, and at the very least, it can be a 5-for-1 if you get each opponent to sacrifice their best creature and return 2 of your creatures from the graveyard to your hand. So no matter what you do with this, it's going to be a sweet, sweet addition to your deck, and the flexibility for the commands are all really good. Now we're moving into the top 10 proper, and we have some amazing cards here. We're going to start with number 10, Hurkyl's Final Meditation. This card is a card that I think people are sleeping on a lot. Nobody seems to be realizing just how powerful this can be. If you can pump enough mana into it, this is very similar to Cyclonic Rift, except it actually ends the turn for the player whose turn you play it on. Now that's really, really ridiculous. That does cost 3 mana more than Cyclonic Rift, and you are still bouncing your own things. But in the same way, you're going to have the chance to rebuild before anyone else does, so it's just a very, very strong card. And I feel like this should be seeing a lot more talk. It's also essentially a time walk effect, somewhat, because you can kind of make somebody lose their turn. So I'm really, really surprised that there has not been more talk about this and that this is going for so cheap. People seem to have a very short memory, so I would pick these up if you can. I think they're very good. Number 9 is Portal to Phyrexia. This slots into a wide variety of decks, and it's just absolutely brutal, even without the second part. The first part of the card, where it's going to destroy 9 creatures essentially for 9 mana, is really solid. There's so many ways to cheat this into play, and there's so many ways to recur this with artifact synergies. So this can be very, very good in any sort of artifact recursion or reanimation deck, but then it also has the additional value of returning a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield under your control every upkeep. So that's fantastic. It's basically shield red, and you can actually take your opponent's creatures too. So this is really, really good. Don't expect this to happen very often, because people are going to remove this, obviously, but that's why it's useful to evaluate this card as if it only has the first ability. And even so, 9 mana to have your opponent sacrifice a total of 9 creatures is pretty good. Next up, we have Gwena, Eyes of Gaia, and I think this is another one that people are sleeping on a lot. This is a very, very strong card. Basically Shaman of Forgotten Ways, but better in my opinion. And Shaman of Forgotten Ways is already a card that is very, very solid in Commander. This is also going to grow itself. It's also going to untap itself, so you can use the mana multiple times in a turn if you're playing big stuff. It's just very, very powerful. And there's actually ways to make this even stronger, because if you play creatures that are not very expensive but have high power, then you're still going to get the untap and counter. This is a very cool card as a commander or in the 99, and I think it's a very, very underrated card at the moment. The next one is not underrated by anyone at all. It is Awaken the Woods. Everybody's talking about how powerful this card is. I do think it's a powerful card, but I don't think it's quite as strong as people are thinking, and I think it will probably drop in price quite a bit over the next few weeks. It's very good if you're in a landfall deck, and it's very good if you're in any kind of deck that can give the things haste, so you can either tap them immediately or attack with them immediately. But otherwise, I mean, ramping when you already have that much mana is not fantastic, and it's also very vulnerable to having a board wipe or a removal, which other ramp spells aren't necessarily. So it comes with its own downsides, it has some upsides, but I think it's basically going to be very good in landfall decks and probably not that good in other decks. So I think it's fine at number 7. Number 6 is Titania's Command, and this one is just so good. All 4 modes of this are usable. The worst one is obviously the one where you're getting 2/2 bears. That one is fine, but in a pinch it can be okay. But the other 3 modes are fantastic. The one that searches for 2 lands and puts them straight onto the battlefield is so good. You can just search up for Cabal Coffers and Urborg, Tomb of Yogmoth, and have them straight in play immediately. That's really, really strong. And then it also has incidental graveyard hate stapled on, which is always good to have, and it's great like this in a card where you already have another strong effect. But also that graveyard hate is going to gain you a ton of life. It's going to give you 1 life for each card exiled this way. If you're against a graveyard deck, you could be gaining 20 life, 30 life off of this pretty easily, which is ridiculous. And then it even has another mode, which is actually, I think, one that people are also sleeping on a little bit, which is the +2/+2 counters on all your board. That's actually a decent finisher. It's a decent way in a go wide strategy to just end the game. So it's basically Graveyard Hate, a finisher, and Primeval Titan all on the same card. Really? This is just a really, really strong card, and it's going to see a lot of play in the format. Erzas Psylex is an interesting one for dealing with the board. White has a lot of options already in this place, but I think the one that distinguishes this card and makes it very good is the fact that it's going to affect lands as well. Recently, WotC doesn't really like printing stuff that deals with your opponent's lands, particularly mass land destruction, because people don't like that. But this is going to do it very cleanly. It's going to let people keep 6 lands as well, so people can't complain too much, and they can still kind of play Magic and use their stuff, but it is going to punish those ridiculous landfall decks that otherwise cannot be punished in the format, which I think is always a bit unfair, because other strategies can all be countered and people are okay with it, but you're not really allowed to interact with your opponent's land ramp decks, which is kind of annoying. Number 4 is one that very few people seem to be talking about, but I think is fantastic, and it is Overwhelming Remorse. Overwhelming Remorse is a removal spell that's going to cost 1 less for each creature card in your graveyard, and it's going to exile a creature or planeswalker straight up, and it's an instant, so you can do it at instant speed. All of that adds up to a very good card. The catch is that it costs 5 mana to start off with, but that's not really much of a catch. Okay, so early game, you might not be able to fire this off for very cheap, but late game, this is going to be a house. In any deck that is filling up their graveyard, which, spoiler, is a lot of black decks, then you're going to be able to cast this for 1 mana or 2 mana, at which point you're very excited. For 2 mana, it's already a better Infernal Grasp. So as long as you have 4 creatures in your graveyard, which is very achievable, you're getting a better path to exile. This card is very, very strong and should be going in a lot of black decks. Next up is Miral, Shield of Argive. No surprises here. This is an incredibly powerful effect. Stopping your opponents from interacting during your turn is really good, and then it has the gravy of also creating soldiers when you attack. So this is just going to go in so many different decks, and it's just a very, very powerful mythic. No surprises here that this is in the top 3, and if you can find it for cheap, you should definitely pick up some copies. Number 2 is definitely also unsurprising. It's Lauren of the Third Path. She is fantastic. Having a better reclamation stage is great, and white is definitely getting all of the goodies these days. So it's a nice 2-for-1 when it comes in, and then when you need it to, you can be political and draw a card and let somebody else draw a card. So it works well in any sort of political deck, in any group hug deck. It also just works well in any white deck, really. You don't have to use that ability, and it also has vigilance on top, so it's just all upside. Very, very strong card. And finally, number 1, the best card in Brothers War, in my opinion, for Commander, is Gix, Yogmoth Freighter. Now, I've already made a video about this commander, and I've made a deck list about him, but man, this guy is just so powerful. The fact that it is going to draw you cards whenever you hit any opponent with one of your creatures means that it's an excellent build around. But not only that, it also encourages your opponents to hit each other, which means it also finds its way into any kind of political deck or deck where you're encouraging people to attack each other. That means it goes well in Go decks, that means it goes well in Shadrick's Silverquill decks, it goes well well in small creature decks that want to be attacking. Aristocrat decks love this. There's just so many decks that this goes into, and that's even without the fact that it can be a commander itself. I find that this is going to slot into the 99 of so many decks, and I think it's underpriced right now at $15. So I would definitely pick this up if you have a chance, because I see this being as expensive as Shieldred the Apocalypse pretty soon. I don't think this is going to maintain a $15 price tag for very long. People are definitely sleeping on this card. So there you have it. That has been our top 10 list of the best commander cards in Brothers War. Do you agree with this list? Is there anything you would change? Please let us know in the comments section below. I read every comment and respond to them all. And if you really enjoyed this video, please consider giving me a like and subscribing to the channel. It really helps me since I'm currently trying to grow. And until next time, take care.